One more question.
Yes.
Yes. Talk,
Another question. Don't blow it now because
Um,
you're doing really, really well.
talking about this might not be well, or it might be gibberish. So sorry if that comes out to be gibberish. You talk about rhythm a little bit and the stanza. I think these days, this genre. I mean, I'm not a poet. I don't write poems. The way I started writing was I began with scribbling like a poem kind of thing. But I stopped writing poetry because I realized I cannot write poems.
Good.
But you are my favorite. You are my favorite poet anyway.
Start.
So, so when we have read Chaucer's poetry or Shakespearean sonnet, and then if we go back, I mean we see the genre is very clear. Poetry. Oh, this is how poems looks like. Or this is fiction. Yeah, this is what fiction looks like, or non-fiction looks like. But coming all the way to this phase, we see that this genre is very fluid. Very fluid. I mean. Sometimes even the fiction or even the non-fiction, oh, it's very poetic. Oh, you wrote it, in a way that sounds very poetic. Even it's a non-fiction. And even in poetry, I mean, before I got here, I was kind of reading a little bit about you, and I came across some articles that talk about Billy Collins' poems are a little bit prosaic, blah, blah, blah. Some of the critics were talking about, who cares, critic? Don't worry about that. You are my favorite. But what I'm trying to... So my question now is that, this sounds very simple, but I'm trying to understand what makes a poem, like right now, from your own, experience and from your own writing, is it form, is it content, is it language, or is it everything, or is it which one more, like form or content? I just want to know much clearly, different from the other genre, because this has been very fluid. That's why I'm trying to know what.
I don't know if I can sort all that out. I mean, if someone writes a poem or they write something and they call it a poem, I'm willing to say that's a poem. Then I might add it's really a terrible poem, or I'm not going to read it, but I'm not. I don't want to. It's kind of futile to stand in front of the cathedral of poetry and say you can come in and you can't come in. But I like the way you bring up, I mean, if you take up like a Shakespeare sonnet, you talk about the rhyme and the meter and all that, and that formality. And yes, we've drifted from that. And that's a huge and interesting topic. And there's a book called Missing Measures by Timothy Steele, an entire book on that switch to the point where rhyme and meter become optional. Well, I'll just say quickly that there is, if we don't have rhyme and meter, it's not like rhyme and meter went out the window. It's a different kind of meter we have now. It's more like a meter of conversation. But if you read enough poetry, like if you read Paradise Lost, if you read Wordsworth's Prelude, if you read, you'll start picking up the fact that all of English poetry is basically iambic. It's dum, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. Those words these are, I think I know. And you will start writing iambically if you read enough poetry. You'll pick up that meter. It's like learning a new music and learning to dance to it. And about rhyme, it's not so much that Whitman was the first poet to write without end rhyme and regular meter. But it's not like the end rhymes were just scissored off the edge of the page and thrown out the window. In the best poems, the sentinel rhymes at the ends of the lines gave up their little positions and invaded the body of the poem. They came inside the poem. So in the back of your book, it'll say internal rhyme. But that's where the music went. Instead of just being on the outside, it became integrated into the sound of the poem. But the other thing we give up, besides some rhyme and meter pleasures, is a system of trust, right? The formal poet, writing in, let's say Shakespeare, writing in rhyme and meter in his sonnets, will never let you down. The formal poet will never let you down. Bless you. And that if Frost starts this woods these are, I think I know, the next line's gonna go snow or go. You know it's coming. If you've never read the poem before, you don't know the content of it, but you know it's coming. fall into the trust, fall backwards and the thoughts will catch you, right? You trust the formal poet. Readers don't trust us in that way. We've lost that system of trust. There are ways to replace it that I can't discuss because it's forbidden. By the craft strip, the coven of poetry I belong to. But it's something to think about in your poetry class, though. How to get that, how to develop a system, how to let the reader know what's coming a little bit. Because in the typical contemporary poem, you don't know the content and you don't know the form. You don't know anything. Sorry. But I think in many of my poems, I try to let you know a little bit about what's coming. Like the trouble with poetry is there are too many poems being written, you know, and how's it gonna stop? And I kind of go on with this position. Or the lines of velocity, they're visiting, you know, the man reading by a fire, and then as you go from that to the woman on the beach and then the child, there's like three things. So you're led through a series, stuff like that helps. But that's the